Have you ever pieced a log cabin? Well, if you have, and it being one of the rudimentary blocks, I bet you have, you can also piece something really fun and interesting. And it starts with a hexagon, but then you piece around the hexagon just like you do a log cabin. And it gives a great effect. It's the same thing, you're just sewing logs onto the sides. Let me show you how. To make my log cabin hexagons, I have printed out a pattern. This is a hexagon, I think it's a 3.5 inch, hexagon. This happens to be a pattern from a magazine that I want to make the quilt. And so I've printed this out and then I've cut out my hexagons. Now the next thing I do is cut out my strips, and according to this pattern, they wanted to be 1 3/8. And I cut them into sections so that I can easily sew them onto my hexagons, and I'm going to sew them all the way around. So here I have sewn one of them, and you can't see the stitching very well because I did it in gray, which is a color you would probably use because you don't want to show. And the next thing I'm going to do is just press this to the back. So now I've pressed this open where it's going to be in the finished block, and what I'm going to do is just trim off these edges. I'm lining this edge up with the edge of the hexagon. I'll trim that off, and now I'll move around to the other side, line it up, and trim it off. And now what I'll do is I'll keep adding strips all the way around the outside edge. Now that first strip I had pre-cut to make it short, but this one I've sewn on, and you can see that I just used a long strip. And you can do that because then you can just keep going along by using the long strips, and it saves you a step from pre-cutting. Now this edge is a little difficult to figure out where to trim, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to line it up at the top here, and then make sure at the bottom that you also have this lined up. And this will give you that top edge. What you're going to do is you're going to keep adding strips. So you add one here, then one here, then one here, then one here. And it'll just be easier to figure out as you go along. You get a rhythm to it. So now I have still my strip here, so I'm going to add another piece over on this side. So now I've added that piece, and what I'll do is line up my ruler again on the part that's already sewn, and trim that side. I'll trim off this also, and now I'll add my next piece. I'm trimming again on both sides, And now I've also switched to the red thread so that you can see my stitching there. And now I've got 2 more pieces to add. Notice how I've stitched here. You do not have to try to stitch into a corner or anything. You can just go straight across. So I've gone farther over the edges because you're just going to cut that off. So you just make sure that you've stitched on the original block, not the strip you're adding, all the way across so that you've gotten from end to end. And the other thing, you can cut these strips shorter to start with. You could cut them in chunks, and some instructions tell you how. The strips are just as easy, so it's just personal preference. Now I'm going to press this. So now this is going to complete that row, so I'm cutting that side. And now I'm going to cut this side, and my block will be finished with that one row. Now you can add on as many rows as you want. You might have a different fabric that you want to add, so you could just keep on adding more rows. For instance, I might put this all the way around it, and to give it another look and to make it look bigger. You can just keep going as much as you want, stop whenever you want, and you'll have a pretty log cabin hexagon. Well, now that you know how to make these log cabin hexagons, you can get creative. Think about, instead of using one size for those logs all the way around, do your first row as one size, say it's a 2 inch, and then the next one you can make it larger. You can make that whole row 3 inches, or you can make it smaller. Play around with it, sketch it out, and you can come up with some really great looking designs. For more videos like this, go to fonsandporter.com.